G'day and welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to go through some choices in the way of setting up your ELR scope, which moves into different sorts of ELR scopes. Basically talking about setting up a scope on your rifle which has all the normal features you'd expect: magnification, good glass, tactical scope, so you can adjust it and dial it in, all that side of things. But what we're mainly after, the main difference that we run into in the ELR world, is we want a lot of adjustable elevation and a reasonable amount of adjustable windage as well. And how do we create that? Now, from many years ago, my basic setup, I started looking for scopes with larger elevation, more internal elevation, so what they had adjustable-wise was very relevant, and then setting that scope up to get most of it. So I would start with something, as people who know our channel and know that I use a lot, and that's the Night Force Attacker, which is not their top tier scope, but their second from top, my favourite one of the range. And largely it had all the right features. It's a 56mm objective, it's got good glass, it's got good reticles. I prefer second focal plane, that's a personal preference, but I prefer second focal plane. Had all those bits and pieces, but the big detail it had was 120 minutes of internal elevation. Now, setting that up was a little bit complicated, but the basics of how I set them up is to run from the amount of internal elevation I have in the scope, whatever that is, I run half of that amount in the base. So that means if I have 120 minutes of elevation in an attacker scope, internal elevation, then I want 60 minutes of base. And the way I did that, there's all sorts of ways. The way I did it was I could get quite easily, for most rifles, was a 40-minute rail. So Night Force themselves do a 40-minute rail for a Remington 700. And various ways of using that on other rifles, but a 40-minute rail, and then I would run another Night Force product, which was the 20 MOA Unimount. The 40 and the 20 together gave me 60, and then I could set my scope up. I could get 120 minutes of elevation, sometimes more, and yes, I could zero at 100, and that's what I did. Most of my rifles and a lot of my setups were like that way for a long time. And I'll bring a rifle into the picture of my next generation of what I've been doing and how I've been making that go even further. Right, we have there the next generation and what I quite like. Now, I'll qualify this before I go through and explain this. What I'm talking about is adjustable bases. That's what this is. I did see, and people who know saw me use different adjustable bases. I'm not going to mention any names or pick any brands, but adjustable base, which is a vernier style adjustable base. So that means that you have a thread that can wind up and down and adjust your base underneath your set of rings. It was actually a base rather than a rail. It was the actual base, and adjust things. And I suppose I'd go quickly there and explain that I don't like that idea. I found movement in them. I found them to be repeatable sometimes and not other times. When I really pushed the equation, I fell back on my engineering thoughts on the subject, and actually having an adjustment, have thread, there's got to be play, there's got to be movement. Plus you've also got this system with a scope, be it big, heavy or otherwise, when you've got a lot of inertia going on, things moving around, all that system has potential issues inside it. So that's one reason that I went to what I have here, which is an adjustable base, but it has lockdowns. So essentially it has a pivot at the front, and I'll put on an image on here so you can see this properly, but it has a cam here with a lockdown in the center. So the cam has 0 to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, up to 70 minutes. You position it, you rock it over on the cam, so you rock it over one, or you loosen off the screws, you rock it over to wherever you want to be, and then you lock them back down. So it becomes rigid, not flexible, not adjustable. Once it's locked, it's a solid unit, and that attracted me. So this is a great system, and I use a lot of them. Now, to use this properly, it's a little bit more complicated than just getting one of these. To use it properly, I then have to get custom bases, which I do quite regularly, custom rails I should say, set up to have the scope zeroed, centered I should say, when it's at 100 yards. I want to have a 0 and I want to have the maximum adjustment. So my 60 minutes which is half the internal elevation, is still relevant, and that's what the rail is to do this properly. So that gives me a full setup as I had with the other two components for the scope, while this adjustable base is zeroed, plus the 70 minutes of extra elevation. So set up what you're looking here. Generally what I get with a Nightforce Attacker on a 60-minute base, I generally get 120 to 130 minutes. This one actually has 128 minutes of adjustment like that, plus another 70 minutes available to me. So this little package here, looking in that form, can nearly give me 200 minutes of elevation. So awesome. That's the package I use, and I use a lot. But it gives us some other options, some other bits and pieces we can do with this same sort of setup. Now let me change over rifles again, and I'll go through that. Okay, here's another rifle set up in a similar form. Now you can see this has got the same deal going on. It's got a base set up in here, which is actually set up for half of what this scope has in top here. It has so that means that it can get the full adjustment out of this scope from and 100 yard zero in this scope. The big deal with this, it should say it has the air attack on here. So it has the air attack where you can adjust it and get different adjustment out of the scope there as well. So that's that bit, all nice and neatly set up. This one is set up on 0 at the moment, but able to go up and add another 70 minutes to it. The big difference, and what I'm talking about here, is actually this scope, which is a scope I haven't tried yet. I've set it all up so I can go out and do a shoot. I hope to do it shortly. It's on loan to me. This is a March scope. I'll put pictures on what the scope is. The High Master, which is a scope that I suppose a couple of things I'd explain about that. One, I really, or my ignorance on the subject, I suppose, is that I was under the impression that March scopes were very high quality scopes, great for lots of power, that side of things, but really more set up in a bench rest format. When I started to speak to the guys, I did the review and a shoot with the Genesis scope a little while ago. It really came and pointed out to me the fact they have lots of in their range, lots and lots of choices, and they have some really good tactical scopes. And it still came down to the same fundamental flaw for me, as I didn't have the internal adjustment in them. This one here has only, I think, 60 minutes of internal elevation, which means it was a compromise, but it is a second focal plane. It has up to 60 power. It has very good, a nice fine reticle. It has very clear glass, very good scope on every other level. And a part of what I wanted to do the video about is not just for a March scope, although an awesome choice in the way of scopes when you look at it in this sort of package, but when you have, where you already have a very good scope, or a scope you're very happy with, it shoots like it's good, got good, all the features you like, but it doesn't have that adjustment, doesn't have the elevation, then with a bit of messing with, get the right rail to suit to make sure it's maxed out, and you maybe already have it, and then running something like this, an adjustable base like this that doesn't have any negatives. I'm not going toward the vernier thing. Like I said, there's some negatives that I see inside them. This sort of thing is able to lock down, become solid, but it gives another 70 minutes. What it turns this particular scope into is with 60 minutes of internal elevation and 70 minutes of external elevation in the cant in this scope, it gives us 130 minutes of elevation. So it puts it into 60 power, very good, all the other features very good, very tractable, it tracks perfectly, all the features are very good in this scope, and it gives us back to that place. Now, personally, I would still, if I was going for a straight up combination, I would still go for my Nightforce, I would go for my Attacker because of the qualities I get in the way of the extra elevation, but this has a win in the way of it simply has more power, and from what I've seen, I haven't verified it, but it has slightly better glass. I don't think there's a lot in that. The extra power is going to suit some people, and depends what you're shooting, but the extra power is something that's there. More what I'm really talking about is that you already have one of these, or you have, or there's lots of good scopes out there. Smith & Bender's another one of the ones that doesn't have that internal elevation. This is a way that means you don't need to sell that scope or buy another scope where you can actually go through this. Lots of choices. I'm one for having more bits and pieces. I think it's really good, but this is a real option that works really well. So that's that one there. Let me get another one, because there's another option that's around the place too. Okay, another option. This is basically another rifle in a similar setup. I'm ignoring all that, not going through that side of things. They all effectively are very similar. The big difference I've got here, well, a couple of things. One, this is the Valdata scope, the G2 Valdata. So it has 150 minutes of internal elevation. Very good scope, nice in all the features, good glass, all the bits and pieces. I actually found that it's although really good, once we're starting to go past 130 minutes of elevation, in full power we're starting to lose a little bit of our clarity because we've got so much adjustment going on inside there. Still works fine, still can use it, but past that point I found it's not perfect up there. But otherwise, super fine reticle on this one. That's another feature that really stands out to it. And I've only done the basics of shooting with this. It works really well, really happy with it. But I noticed, and the guys sent us as well, thank you very much, Glenn and Val that have sent us over this other bit to play with. And it's a really good feature. By the way, it doesn't just suit this scope, it suits other scopes as well. And what I'm talking about there is this adjustable base that this one has. This is, now you'd go through the same process. You're going to run a rail to suit your elevation, but you actually do have some choices, which I'll go through in a minute. So you run a rail, you run rings to set up that, and then this base rail combination, this base adjustable piece, it doesn't have rings on it. It's able to bolt on your own rings on top. So you've got lots of choices here. But this has the same sort of principle. It has lockdown points. It actually has 3 lockdown points in it, so it clamps to solid. But you'll notice, and I'll put some images on there, that there is 5 little holes in the side here. Now I won't pull it to pieces, it's all set up at the moment, but what essentially you do is loosen off these 3 bolts, then take this bolt out, and for each hole there you have a different position. You have a different cant scope elevation. You actually have 0, 50, 100, 150, 200. This base with that little bolt in the middle there is the dowel point to be able to hold your position and get it spot on. Means that you can change this, you can add yourself in the field with a couple of spanners, you can add yourself up to another 200 minutes of elevation. Now I've done this one a little bit different, and I've done it the way that probably most people would. I've set this one up so I'm using the first 50 minutes. I'm actually set it up on 50 to get my zeros and everything where it was. With the rail I had and all the bits and pieces, that let me set up in that point. So I've got this 0 to 100. I can wind straight up to just with internal adjustment up to 150 minutes of elevation. But like I said, I prefer to really stay in where the optical quality is perfect. So that's in the 120 neck of the woods, so I can wind up to there in perfect elevation. Then I want to go further. I can dial on, even how I got to set it up here, I can dial on another 150 minutes of elevation. So that means in this little combination here, that's 270 minutes of elevation is what you're looking at in that format. That gets you way out past most things. So let me stop there, and I want to go through some other details to keep in mind in these choices. Okay, so now some of those other details I want to go through. There's obviously other choices. There is the likes of the Charlie Tarak, the mirror system, a little periscope system that sits on the front here to be able to give more elevation. There's the Genesis with adjustable base, with the adjustable system. The whole scope actually moves on mounted to the rail. Those are both very good options, and both have their choices without question. Both, in my opinion, have some places. I don't like to use the word negatives, but there are some pros and cons to go with them. The Charlie Tarak system that hangs on the front here, bolt-on system, is nice and neat and tidy. It is a big, heavy hunk that you're sitting on the front of your rifle. So there are some positives, some real positives for extreme elevation. And to be truthful, for extreme elevation, I don't see a better option. Because it gives you a higher point where you can see over your muzzle, that side of things. You can also see over the immediate effect of your barrel of the mirage, or the pressure waves you can see coming off your, the heat waves I should say, coming off your barrel when you've got issues with when you've shot a few rounds. So having up high is really nice. There, in a way of running it the way I'm running it in particular, strapping it to the front, or strapping everywhere, you've got another system, another more complicated piece, put more weight load on things, heavier on things, and there's, like I said, there's some issues to go with it. Making it, tracking it, adjusting, recording properly, all that sort of stuff. Bits and pieces I've been through before, but best option we have at the moment for real ultra long range, or I shouldn't say ultra long range as much as I should say very high elevation shots. And what's the right way to say it? Lots of MOA needed. The Genesis system, with its adjustment side of things, there's a very good system, works really good, works really nicely in all sorts of levels, and I found a great scope, and probably trying to head for the absolute best optical quality by keeping the actual solid mechanism of the scope solid all the time. One of the features that it struggles with, which is the same as when you have too much external adjustment, is that your scope has to change angles too much. So my honest opinion is that once you're really moving past probably the 150 minutes of cant, around that point, and it depends on your setup, but once you've gone past that point, that amount of cant, then what you're actually starting to do is everything has to change on the back of the rifle. You're lifting things up, lifting cheek rests up, lifting shoulder pads up, or butt pads up I should say, starting to try and look through the barrel. All gets a bit complicated once you go too far. Probably with something well set up like the Genesis, then around the 200 minutes is I think where it's going to be perfect. Even though it's got 400 minutes of adjustment, around the 200 I think is the place that it gets sweet. Beyond that point you're actually not just able to in-field adjust unless you've got a lot of adjustability elsewhere, and setup is all set up to suit that. Exactly the same thing happens for adjustment in a external adjustable base. So in the vernier ones, like I said, there's movement issues, but the same thing. Once you go too far, then you get to the point where you adjust things too much. So but I should say, keeping in mind, when you can wind on 100 minutes of elevation in your scope, which effectively doesn't have to move too much, although your reticle position changed a little bit inside your scope, your actual your whole scope isn't moving, so it stays quite flat. So in a system like this, where you could wind on 120, let's just say 100 minutes of elevation, and then 150 minutes of scope of elevation, that's 250 minutes, and probably getting to the sensible level of where you really take it. You haven't raised things too much at the back here, so with minor adjustments you're able to keep yourself in position. Once you've gone past that point, trying to max everything out, then like I said, there's places for everything, and all of those things have good points about them. You know, from the likes of the Genesis system, which keeps its perfect optical quality looking straight through the lens, which has it tilting it too far, going extreme range, okay, you're starting to run into where you've got to change your position on the back of the stock. To the likes of, so this system here, this scope, having 150 minutes of elevation, but it's starting to lose a little bit of optical quality at the extreme ranges. To complex system setup, and like I said, there is no perfect system. There is always going to be a little bit to go with it. And what I'd really come back to when you understand all that and making sense of it as to what should I choose, really it's about assessing what you're really shooting, what distance you're really going to. There is obviously people, or the logic, or an understandable logic, if I'll set my rifle up to be able to do absolutely anything and then I'll use it where I use it. As I have said, or as I'm heading towards I should say, there is compromises you're introducing in one form or other. These systems here, which I just showed you, are almost no compromise and giving you out to what in most cases is going to be the 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 yards depending on what caliber you're shooting. And what I'm really heading for in that conversation is work out what you're really going to be able to do. What's really it? Okay, the concept of it can shoot 5Ks, but I only have 2.5 Ks or 2 Ks or 2 miles or whatever it is. This is all I'm ever going to actually be able to get to. Then keep it inside that framework. What the rifle is, what the caliber is, what the combination is. We're all working with a budget of one form or another. And then you can, with fairly simple and smart decisions, you can make something that's very flexible and do different things with the different bits and pieces. And like I said, keep in mind what you're really doing with it. The less complicated, the more consistency you're likely, and the more reliability you're likely to maintain out of it. So anyway, you'll have to excuse me, my big light died, it needs to be recharged, so I just want to finish the video for you. I wanted to introduce this new piece from Veldata. I don't think it's released yet. I think this is one of his beta models or test models to go through that he sent to us, so thank you very much again, Val over there for sending this, and Glenn for organising it. Great idea. I've been waiting for someone to do it, and this looks really good. Haven't used it yet, apart from setting it up on this rifle. Want to get out and play with it. Actually waiting for some bullets for Berger to get the 156 grain 6.5s out, so I can play with this a bit more. But looks awesome. Really happy with it. I also wanted to talk about the March scope and show you that I'm going to be playing with it, but really introduce that thought that with one smart piece, and I'm actually talking about that air attack base, that piece can actually take a lot of scopes that were really good scopes, really good for long range, but not quite suited to ELR, and really bring them into, we can use that scope. And working with a budget means you don't need to buy another one, or you have your heart set on a Smith & Bender or something like that, and that's what you really want. But it gives you the flexibility to make that work, still get that elevation. I would requalify. I'm not a big fan of the vernier side of things. The adjustable ones. Not picking on any brands, but I'm not a big fan of that. I'm much more of a fan of the lockdown system, which you have proper solid locks. It becomes a rigid thing, not relying on any threads or anything like that. And just a general overview. So anyway, listen, I really hope that's of some help to some people. That was my main aim here. Thanks for checking in on us. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Down below here, we've got a link to our web store where we have some of the specialised long-range shooting products that we actually produce. Check them out.
And for those of you who can, it'd be great to get some help. In our store we have support bits, and when you purchase those, the money goes direct to our channel and helps us bring these videos to you.
Thanks, guys.
See you next time.